In the dimly lit halls of St. Serenity Hospital, where the cries of newborns bring hope to weary hearts, a seasoned maternity nurse named Evelyn begins her routine shift. But tonight, something feels off. As she performs her usual rounds, a peculiar case catches her attention. A newborn baby with deep, inexplicable scars. Little does Evelyn know, this discovery will unravel a chilling mystery that will change her life forever. Evelyn had worked at St. Serenity for over a decade. Known for her gentle demeanor and sharp intuition, she had a knack for noticing things others might overlook. The maternity ward, usually filled with the warmth of new beginnings, felt unusually cold that evening. Shadows seemed to stretch longer than usual, and an eerie silence blanketed the air. It was during her second round of the night when Evelyn first noticed the baby. Baby Liam, born just 2 days ago, was unusually quiet for a newborn. His mother, Clara, was resting in her room, recovering from an emergency C-section. When Evelyn unwrapped the baby's swaddle to check his vitals, her breath caught in her throat. Faint but distinct, Liam's tiny body bore several scars, thin, deliberate lines etched across his chest and back. They didn't resemble accidental scratches or birth-related injuries. Evelyn's hands trembled as she gently traced the marks with her gloved fingers. Her first instinct was to report it, but something made her pause. She glanced at the baby's medical file. There was no mention of these scars in the delivery notes. Everything about his birth was listed as normal, barring the C-section. Clara had been a healthy mother with no complications during pregnancy. But Evelyn knew better. These scars didn't just appear out of nowhere. Her thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound, a soft, almost inaudible hum. Evelyn looked around the nursery, but saw nothing out of place. The sound seemed to emanate from Liam's bassinet. Shaking off the unease, she decided to check on Clara. Clara was awake, her pale face illuminated by the moonlight streaming through the window. Evelyn hesitated, but eventually brought up the scars. To her surprise, Clara appeared confused. "Scars? What scars?" she asked, her voice weak but steady. Evelyn described them in detail, but Clara insisted she had never noticed anything unusual. She even asked Evelyn to show her. Together, they returned to the nursery. But when Evelyn unwrapped Liam again, the scars were gone. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Was she imagining things? Clara, though visibly tired, offered a faint smile. "It's probably nothing. I'm sure you're just tired," she said, trying to reassure Evelyn. But Evelyn wasn't convinced. Later that night, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She reviewed the security footage of the nursery, hoping for some answers. At first, everything appeared normal, but then she noticed something strange. At precisely 3:03 a.m., the screen flickered. For a brief moment, the nursery was plunged into darkness. When the footage resumed, Liam's bassinet seemed to shift slightly, as if someone or something had been there. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Evelyn decided to stay close to the nursery during her shift. As the hours dragged on, she noticed more unsettling occurrences. The hum she had heard earlier returned, this time louder and more distinct. It sounded almost like a lullaby, but with an ominous undertone. Just as she was about to investigate, the hospital intercom crackled to life. "Code Gray, Room 214, it announced, startling Evelyn. Room 214 was Clara's room. Evelyn rushed down the hallway, her heart pounding. When she arrived, Clara was sitting upright in her bed, her eyes wide with fear. "He was here," she whispered, clutching the hospital blanket tightly. "A man. He was standing at the foot of my bed." Evelyn scanned the room, but found no sign of anyone. The security guard who arrived moments later confirmed the area was secure. But Clara was adamant. She described the man as tall, with piercing eyes and an unsettling grin. "He just vanished," she said, her voice trembling. Evelyn tried to comfort Clara, but her own unease was growing. Who was this man, and what connection did he have to Liam and his mysterious scars? As the night stretched on, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of her vision, and the hum followed her wherever she went. It wasn't until the end of her shift that she noticed something new, a piece of paper tucked under Liam's bassinet. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. Written in shaky, almost childlike handwriting were the words, "He's coming for him." Evelyn couldn't shake the chill creeping down her spine. The piece of paper, with its cryptic message, only deepened the mystery. He's coming for him. Who was the he the note referred to? And why was it so urgent? The haunting lullaby, the strange man in Clara's room, and now this message. It was all too much to ignore. Evelyn had to find answers. But the deeper she dug, the more terrifying the truth became. The hours between shifts felt like days. Evelyn couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with questions she couldn't answer. She had worked in this hospital for years, but nothing had prepared her for what was happening now. The security footage kept playing over and over in her mind. The flicker in the nursery, the way Liam's bassinet seemed to move as if something unseen had been there. Was someone in the hospital tampering with the recordings? Or was something darker at play? Unable to rest, Evelyn arrived at St. Serenity early the next morning. She walked to the nursery, her footsteps echoing down the empty halls. The first thing she did was inspect Liam's bassinet, half expecting to find another note. But there was nothing. The room was eerily still, as if nothing had happened the night before. But Evelyn wasn't fooled. She knew there was more to this than met the eye. She checked the security footage again, but this time she decided to look at the footage from an earlier date. She was hoping to find something, a clue, anything that could explain the strange events. As the hours passed, Evelyn's eyes grew tired, but she didn't stop. And then she found it. It was a recording from a few weeks before. The date was marked on the screen, 2 weeks before Liam's birth. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat as she saw something that made her blood run cold. In the footage, a man tall, just as Clara had described, was standing in the hallway outside the maternity ward. He was dressed in a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat, his face obscured by shadow. But there was something unsettling about his presence, something that made the air around him feel heavy. The man stood there, motionless, as though he were waiting for something or someone. Evelyn leaned in closer to the screen, her breath held in anticipation. What was he doing here? Who was he? Then, with eerie precision, the man slowly turned and disappeared into the stairwell. The camera's view was obstructed, but the sight of him lingering in the hallway was enough to send a shiver down Evelyn's spine. What was he waiting for? And why did he appear just before Liam's birth? Evelyn's mind raced as she scrolled through more footage. Days passed. The man's presence seemed to be everywhere in the hospital, lurking in hallways, standing at the periphery of rooms. But each time, his face remained hidden, his identity a mystery. She couldn't understand why no one else had noticed him. Could the man have something to do with the scars on Liam's body? Was he connected to whatever dark force was now haunting the maternity ward? She needed more answers. The only person who could possibly know more was Clara, the baby's mother. But Clara's mental state had been fragile ever since the birth. Could she offer any useful information? Evelyn decided to visit her in her room once again. Clara was sitting in bed, gazing out the window. She seemed distant, her expression vacant. Evelyn knocked gently on the door, her heart pounding. When Clara turned to face her, there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "Clara," Evelyn began softly, "I need to ask you more about that man you saw last night." Clara's eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked as though she might break down. "He's real," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's been following me. He's been in my dreams, too." Evelyn's heart clenched at the fear in Clara's voice. "Tell me everything, Clara. I need to know." Clara swallowed hard, her eyes filled with terror. "I don't know why, but it started before I got pregnant. I kept seeing him in my dreams, always watching me. And then, when I found out I was pregnant, the dreams stopped, but he didn't. He started showing up in the hospital, watching me. I thought I was just losing my mind, but I swear he was real." Evelyn's mind reeled as Clara's words sank in. This wasn't just about Liam's birth. It had started long before that. The man in the shadows had been stalking Clara, tormenting her long before the baby was born. But why? And why now? "I saw him again last night," Clara continued, her eyes welling with tears. "He was in my room, standing at the foot of my bed. He said Liam was his." Evelyn's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" What did he say? Clara shook her head, as if trying to block out the memory. He said he had waited for so long. That Liam was the one he had been waiting for. And then he vanished. Before Evelyn could ask more, Clara's voice faltered. I've been hiding something from you. Something about the scars. I didn't want to believe it. But now, I have no choice. It's not just the scars, it's the mark. The mark he left. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. What mark? Clara pulled her hospital gown down slightly, revealing a dark, jagged scar on her own chest. It was nearly identical to the ones on Liam's body. Evelyn recoiled, a sense of horror flooding her veins. How did that happen? She whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know, Clara said, her voice breaking. But I've been hiding it ever since the day I found out I was pregnant. He did this to me, and now he's after Liam. The truth was unraveling before Evelyn's eyes, and it was more terrifying than anything she could have imagined. This wasn't just a random series of events. There was something deliberate happening here, something far darker than she could comprehend. Evelyn stood up, her mind racing. She had to get to the bottom of this, even if it meant confronting the horrors lurking within the walls of St. Serenity Hospital. But as she turned to leave, a soft hum filled the room again. The lullaby. This time it was clearer, and it was coming from the nursery. Without a second thought, Evelyn rushed toward the source of the sound. But when she arrived, the nursery was empty. Liam's bassinet was gone. The only thing left behind was the haunting hum, echoing in the empty room. Evelyn stood motionless in the nursery, the unsettling hum still ringing in her ears. Liam's bassinet was gone, vanished without a trace. Her heart pounded as she scanned the empty room, but there was no sign of the baby. Only the oppressive silence of the hospital, now thicker than ever. She knew that whatever was happening, the nightmare was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. Panic surged through Evelyn's veins. She rushed back to the nurse's station, breathless, but the corridors were eerily quiet. It was as if the entire hospital had been plunged into a strange, suffocating stillness. She hurried to the main lobby to find the security guard, hoping he could shed light on where Liam had gone. The guard was seated at the desk, his head down, seemingly asleep. Evelyn approached him quickly, shaking him awake. Where's the baby? Liam, the newborn? She demanded. The guard blinked in confusion. Liam? He's not in the nursery? No, Evelyn replied, her voice tight with urgency. He was just in there, but now he's gone. The guard's face went pale. I haven't seen anyone move him. I'd have noticed. He looked at the clock, which read 3:05 a.m., but you're right. Something strange has been going on around here lately. Just last week, we had an incident. Someone or something moved things around in the storage room on the 3rd floor. It's been happening more and more. Evelyn felt a chill run through her. What do you mean, someone or something? The guard lowered his voice, glancing nervously around the room as if worried someone might overhear. It's hard to explain, but there's been this feeling, like we're being watched or followed. I've heard things, whispers, footsteps when no one's there. He looked at her, eyes wide. You felt it too, didn't you? Evelyn nodded slowly. Yes, he continued. There's an old part of the hospital, a wing that hasn't been used in years. The hospital is still expanding, but there's something in that wing. They say it was sealed off because of an accident, but no one talks about it. The older nurses, the ones who've been here for decades, they refuse to go near it. Evelyn's mind raced. Could Liam have been taken there? Could the man she had seen in the security footage, this shadowy figure, be linked to the Forgotten Wing? She had to investigate. Where is this wing? She asked urgently. The guard hesitated, but finally pointed toward the end of the hallway. Upstairs. It's locked, but I know the code. Without waiting for any more explanations, Evelyn sprinted toward the stairs. She needed answers. She needed to find Liam before whatever dark force had already claimed him could do any more damage. As she ascended the stairwell, a strange, heavy air seemed to press against her chest. The higher she went, the darker it became. The light flickered in the hallway at the top of the stairs. She felt a shiver run down her spine as she approached the entrance to the sealed wing. The door was old, its metal frame rusted from years of disuse. The guard's keycard buzzed as she swiped it, and the door creaked open. A musty scent filled the air as she stepped inside. The hallway was narrow, with peeling wallpaper and faded photographs on the walls, pictures of the hospital's early days. The floors creaked underfoot, and the silence was absolute, oppressive even. Evelyn moved forward, her breath quick and shallow. Every instinct told her to turn back, but she couldn't. Not now. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating old doors and abandoned equipment. The hospital wing felt frozen in time, a place that had been left behind for a reason. And that reason, Evelyn felt it in her bones. Whatever was here, whatever lingered in these forgotten halls, it was not of this world. The first door she opened led into a storage closet filled with dusty supplies, but nothing else. She moved quickly to the next room, her heart pounding louder with each step. As she reached the third door, her hand trembled when she touched the handle. When the door creaked open, she was met with an empty room. But something about it made her skin crawl. It wasn't the room itself. It was the feeling in the air, like something unseen was watching her every move. Suddenly, the hum returned. That same lullaby she had heard earlier. Faint but unmistakable. It was coming from deeper within the wing. Evelyn didn't think twice. She followed the sound, her mind spinning with the terrifying possibilities. The hallway curved, leading to a door at the very end. This door, unlike the others, wasn't old or dusty. It was pristine, untouched by time. Evelyn reached for the handle, her breath caught in her throat. As soon as her fingers brushed the cold metal, the hum stopped. Dead silence. A voice, low, guttural, whispered from inside the room. "Leave now, or you'll never leave." Evelyn froze. The voice was unmistakable. It was the same voice Clara had described. The man, the one who had been watching them. She took a deep breath and forced herself to open the door. Inside was a sight that made her heart stop. The room was small, with only a single bed in the center. But it wasn't the bed that horrified her. It was the walls. The walls were covered in scratches, claw marks, and strange symbols, all etched deeply into the wood. And in the center of the bed, lying motionless, was Liam. But Liam wasn't alone. The man was there, standing over him. His face was still hidden in shadow, but his presence was undeniable. Evelyn felt as though the air had thickened, the weight of his malevolent energy pressing against her chest. The man turned slowly, revealing a twisted smile. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Evelyn tried to speak, but her throat felt tight, as though an invisible force was choking her. She struggled to move closer to Liam, but the man's presence seemed to paralyze her in place. The man stepped forward, closer to Evelyn, and for the first time, his face emerged from the shadows. His eyes, cold and empty, bored into her soul. He reached out, his fingers long and thin like claws. "You've disrupted everything," he murmured. "Now you'll pay the price." Evelyn's mind raced, desperate for a way to break free. She had to protect Liam. But what could she do against something so ancient, so powerful? With a surge of panic-fueled adrenaline, she reached for her phone, her hand shaking. She was barely able to dial the emergency line when the phone slipped from her hand. The man laughed, a deep, chilling sound that echoed through the room. And then, as quickly as it had begun, everything went silent. The man disappeared. The room grew still again, as though nothing had happened. Evelyn stood frozen, staring at the empty space where the man had been. Her hands trembled as she scooped Liam up in her arms, his tiny body limp and cold. Before she could react, the door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang. The hospital wing was completely dark now, and the hum of the lullaby returned, louder than before. Evelyn ran, her heart racing in terror, her mind in chaos. Whatever force had taken Liam was still there, lurking in the shadows. And it was waiting. Evelyn's breath was ragged as she sprinted through the dark corridors, her arms cradling the lifeless form of little Liam. The weight of what she had just witnessed hung heavy on her chest, but it was the fear that gripped her heart, squeezing tighter with every passing second. The man was still out there. He hadn't vanished. He was toying with her. The hospital, once a place of healing, now felt like a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. And Evelyn knew, in the deepest recesses of her mind, that the only way to escape this nightmare was to face it head-on. Evelyn couldn't afford to waste another second. She stumbled down the hallway, her legs trembling with exhaustion, but there was no stopping now. She had to find a way out, find a way to protect Liam. Her mind raced with questions, none of which had answers. Who was this man? What did he want with the baby? And why had he been haunting Clara for so long? The pieces didn't fit together. Everything about this situation felt wrong, like she had walked into a nightmare with no clear way out. The lullaby hummed in the distance again, its sweet, melancholic notes taunting her. It was coming from the stairwell, the same one she had used to enter the sealed wing. Her instinct screamed at her to turn away, to flee. But something pushed her forward, a feeling of inevitability she couldn't shake. As she rounded the corner, she was met by the eerie sight of the staircase leading down into the depths of the hospital. The hum was louder now, echoing through the walls like a siren. She stepped cautiously onto the stairs, her eyes darting around the darkened hallways. The air felt thicker here, more suffocating, as if something unseen was pressing against her chest. She could feel it, the weight of 1,000 eyes upon her. Her heart thudded in her ears, and every instinct told her to run. But Evelyn refused to give in to the terror. She had made it this far, and she wasn't going to turn back now. She had to confront the source of this nightmare. At the bottom of the stairs, she paused. There, in the shadows of the hallway, stood the man. His figure was tall, looming in the dim light. His face, though still obscured in darkness, radiated a sense of malevolent power. Evelyn's grip tightened around Liam. She could feel the weight of the baby's small body, cold and fragile in her arms. "You shouldn't have come here," the man said, his voice a low rasp that sent a shiver up her spine. "This is the end for you, Evelyn. There's no escaping now." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, a surge of determination rising in her chest. "Why? What do you want with Liam? What's your connection to him?" The man stepped closer, his slow, deliberate movements sending a chill through the air. "He is my son." The words hit Evelyn like a slap, and for a moment, she was frozen in place. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. "Your son?" she repeated, her voice trembling. The man nodded, his cold eyes narrowing. "Yes, Liam is the child I have waited for, the child who is destined to fulfill the prophecy." Evelyn's mind was reeling, her heart racing. "Prophecy? What are you talking about?" The man let out a low, dark laugh, his voice like a rattle in the silence. "You're too late to understand, nurse. Too late to stop what has already been set in motion. The child you're holding, he is not just any baby. He is the key to bringing forth what has been lost." The words made no sense, and yet Evelyn felt a cold sense of dread wash over her. She took a step back, her pulse quickening. "You're lying. You're just a sick, twisted man." "I'm not lying," the man interrupted, his voice sharp and cold. "I have waited for centuries. I have bided my time, and now the ritual is almost complete. This hospital, this place of healing, is where it all ends. You think you can stop me? You can't." The man's hands twitched, and Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she saw them transform. His fingers elongating, becoming sharp, claw-like. His skin twisted and contorted, revealing dark veins beneath. The air around him seemed to shimmer, and Evelyn realized, with a sickening lurch in her stomach, that he wasn't just a man. He was something much worse. With a surge of adrenaline, Evelyn turned and ran. She couldn't let him take Liam. She wouldn't let him complete whatever horrific plan he had. She dashed through the hospital, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. As she neared the stairwell that led back to the main floor, she heard the man's voice behind her, growing louder, more menacing. "You can't escape. This is your end, Evelyn." Her lungs burned, but she pushed herself harder, her legs moving faster than she thought possible. She couldn't stop. Not now. She burst through the emergency exit and into the cold night air. She didn't even stop to look back. Her mind was fixated on one thing. She had to protect Liam. She had to save him from whatever fate the man had planned. But as she ran, she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind her. Heavy, Relentless. Evelyn's heart dropped into her stomach. She had thought she'd escaped, but the man was still following her. His presence was like a shadow, always there, always watching. Just as she reached the parking lot, she saw a flash of movement in her peripheral vision. The man was there, standing in the shadows, his face still hidden. And then, in a voice that seemed to cut through the night air, he spoke one final word. "Run." The ground beneath Evelyn's feet seemed to shift. She stumbled forward, the world around her spinning. But the man's words echoed in her ears, and she realized too late what he had meant. Conclusion. In the final moments of her desperate flight, Evelyn realized that no matter how far she ran, the terror would follow. The man, whatever he truly was not something she could outrun. His reach extended far beyond the walls of the hospital, and his twisted claim on Liam was only the beginning of something far darker. As Evelyn looked down at the baby in her arms, she knew that the nightmare was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The true horror of what had been set in motion was yet to be revealed, and Evelyn was now a part of it, tied to the dark prophecy in ways she couldn't even begin to understand. The world spun around Evelyn as she stumbled through the cold night air, clutching Liam to her chest. Her breath was shallow, her heartbeat erratic, but her eyes were fixed on one thing: the shadows that stretched ominously behind her. The man, the creature, was still there, following her, his presence like a suffocating fog. Evelyn could feel his gaze, even though she dared not turn around. He was playing with her. As the parking lot grew distant, she reached her car and yanked open the door with trembling hands. She could feel her pulse hammering in her throat as she slid into the driver's seat, locking the door with frantic urgency. Her hands, slick with sweat, gripped the steering wheel as she started the engine, praying she could get away. But the air in the car grew thick with unease. The hum of the lullaby returned, faint but unmistakable. She could hear it in her mind now, like it was echoing from somewhere deep inside her, even as the car sped away from the hospital. The road ahead seemed endless, stretching into the darkness, but Evelyn wasn't sure where to go. The creeping feeling that something was wrong deepened with each mile. The hospital, the man, the dark truth behind Liam's birth. It all gnawed at her, threatening to tear apart her sanity. What had the man meant by prophecy? What was it about Liam that made him the key to something so terrifying? As much as Evelyn wanted to put all of it behind her, she couldn't escape the feeling that the answers were just out of reach, waiting for her to uncover them, whether she was ready or not. She glanced at Liam, who had remained unnaturally still in her arms, his small face pale in the dim light. Evelyn's heart clenched. He had been so cold when she'd first picked him up. Had he been harmed by the man? Was there something more to him than she could understand? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, violent jolt, an explosion of pain that shot through her head like lightning. She screamed, swerving the car as her vision blurred. For a split second, the world around her twisted, as though reality itself was warping. And then, just as quickly as it came, the pain disappeared. The road ahead was no longer the same. The familiar landmarks had vanished, replaced by a dark, barren landscape that stretched endlessly in every direction. The sky above was choked with heavy clouds, and the air felt thick with tension. Evelyn slammed on the brakes, her heart racing as the car screeched to a halt. It was as though the world had shifted into a new, nightmarish realm. "Where are we?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Liam's small cry broke through the suffocating silence. Evelyn looked down at him, and her blood ran cold. His eyes were wide open, wide in a way that seemed unnatural, almost empty. His once soft, innocent face had taken on an unsettling, hollow expression. And then, as though something had taken hold of him, his mouth opened, emitting a sound, a whisper that echoed deep within her mind. "Help me!" The voice that came from Liam's mouth wasn't his own. It was cold, distant, and unnatural. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat, panic surging through her veins. "Liam," she gasped, her hands trembling as she held him closer. But the baby didn't respond. Instead, his eyes turned toward the windshield, fixated on something in the distance. Evelyn's gaze followed his, and her blood ran cold as she saw a figure emerging from the shadows ahead. It was the man, but this time he was different. His form seemed to ripple, as if he were shifting between dimensions, his true nature revealed in brief, horrifying flashes. His face flickered, half human, half something else. His skin was pale and cracked, veins of dark energy coursing beneath it. The shadows that clung to him twisted unnaturally, like living things. Evelyn felt the car tremble as the man's presence grew stronger. His form was now fully visible, standing tall in front of the car, blocking her way. His eyes locked onto hers, and once again, his voice reverberated through her mind. "You can't run from what's already begun," he whispered, his words carrying a weight that seemed to crush the air around her. Evelyn's hands were numb as she reached for the door handle. She needed to escape. She had to get away from him. But as she tried to open the door, she felt the car lurch as if it were trapped in place. The man stepped closer, his presence suffocating, bending the very air around them. "You should have never come here," he said, his smile twisting into something grotesque. "You've sealed your fate, Evelyn." Her pulse raced. She was trapped. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. But then, as if on instinct, she turned to Liam. His tiny, fragile form was now glowing faintly, the light intensifying with every second. The glow wasn't warm, it was cold, icy, and it sent a jolt of fear through Evelyn's heart. The man's eyes widened in sudden recognition, his face twisted with fury. "No, it can't be. Not yet." But it was too late. The glow from Liam surged, a blinding flash of light that illuminated the entire car. Evelyn shielded her eyes as the light intensified, filling the world around her. The man screamed, his form disintegrating in the light. "You cannot." His words were cut off as the light consumed him, and his shadowy figure evaporated into nothingness. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest, her hands shaking as she held Liam tighter. The light from him slowly began to fade, and as it did, the world around them seemed to shift once more. The landscape outside the car changed, the eerie, nightmarish realm dissolving into the familiar road she had been on moments ago. It was over. The man was gone, but Evelyn knew that things would never be the same. She had seen what lay beyond the surface of this world, what horrors could unfold if left unchecked. She had uncovered the darkness behind Liam's birth, and the prophecy that had been set in motion long before her arrival. As the car returned to the familiar streets, Evelyn glanced down at Liam. His eyes were still wide, but there was something different now, something more human. He was no longer the cold, empty vessel he had been moments before, but Evelyn could feel it deep in her bones. The darkness hadn't been erased. It had only been delayed. The prophecy wasn't over, and Evelyn had just become part of it. Conclusion. As Evelyn drove into the night, she knew there was no escaping what she had uncovered. The truth had been revealed, but the shadows still lingered, following them wherever they went. The prophecy had not been undone. It was only waiting for the right moment to complete itself. Liam was no longer just a helpless baby. He was the key to something far darker, something Evelyn could only begin to understand. And the man, the creature, wasn't gone. He had only been defeated temporarily. For Evelyn, the fight was far from over. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She would protect Liam, no matter the cost. She had no choice.